Thank you. It's very good to be with you. I'm talking today about the science delusion. And the science delusion is the belief that science has already figured out all the answers and knows everything, all the fundamental questions are settled in principle, leaving only the details to be filled in. Now, a lot of people actually believe that. But I think it's a terrible fallacy, and I think it's a true delusion. There's a conflict in the heart of science at the moment between science as an open-minded, free inquiry based on hypothesis-making, evidence, and change when necessary. That's the ideal of science that many people think science actually is. But the more you actually know about the way it works, you realize that's not unfortunately, how most science today actually functions. Instead, science has become limited by a belief system or worldview. And there's a conflict between science as an open-minded system of inquiry and science as a belief system or worldview. The kind of people who say, I don't believe in God, I believe in science, are people who have a very definite view of the way the world is, and it's essentially the materialist philosophy of nature. It took over science in the late 19th century, and it's been the dominant orthodoxy ever since. There's no reason science has to be conducted within this framework. As a free method of inquiry, it can take place, I think, better in other, less restrictive frameworks of thought. The trouble with the scientific worldview is that people who believe it, people who are followers of what's often called scientism, don't realize that they have a belief system. People who are religious know they've got a belief system, and they know other people have different ones. Now, if you're a Protestant, you know Catholics think differently. If you're Christian, you know Muslims think differently. If you're a Sunni Muslim, you know that Shias think differently. So anyone in the religious world knows that what their beliefs are beliefs, it's part of a worldview. The people who believe in the science delusion don't know they've got a belief system, they just think they know the truth. And that makes them particularly immune from any kind of doubts or criticisms. But what I think we need to do is look at the 10 dogmas on which modern science is based. And what I do in my book is take those 10 dogmas and turn them into questions. And when you turn them into questions and look at them scientifically to see how they held up in the light of modern evidence and in the light of scientific discoveries themselves, it turns out that not one of them holds up very well. And as soon as we allow ourselves to question these dogmas, all sorts of new possibilities open up. And I think that when science is freed from this dogmatic system, we'll see a kind of scientific renaissance, and all sorts of new discoveries would be possible. At the moment, science is suffering from the law of diminishing return. Because of this dogmatic thinking and because of the institutional inertia of the grant-giving system, the peer review system, and so forth, very little new is coming out of science. Within think tanks in London and Washington and elsewhere, the big talk at the moment is of what they call the innovation deficit. Very little new is coming out of science and technology and business. We had many breakthroughs in science over the years, but most of them happened decades ago. The breakthroughs that gave us mobile phones, computers, the internet, and that kind of thing, as well as jet planes and solar panels and all that, these breakthroughs happened a long time ago, and what we've seen since then is incremental improvements in these technologies. The same is true of medicine. There have been very few breakthroughs in medicine, true breakthroughs, in the last 2 or 3 decades. Most of the things that we are impressed by in medicine, antibiotics, steroids, heart transplants, all those kinds of things, were done more than 20 or 30 years ago. Since then, it's been very small incremental improvements for the most part, very few real breakthroughs within official medicine. So, I think that we need to look at these 10 dogmas in more detail, and what I'm going to do is sketch out what those dogmas are to start with, And then I'll zero in on 2 or 3 of them. I won't have time to discuss all 10 this morning. The 10 dogmas are, first, nature is mechanical. The universe is like a machine, animals and plants are like machines, and they don't have any goals or purposes of their own. They're basically just genetically programmed mechanisms. You and I, in the words of Richard Dawkins, are lumbering robots, and our brains are nothing but genetically programmed computers. We could function just as well if we weren't conscious. We might just as well be zombies from the official point of view, because we're just machines. Now, the difference between a machine and an organism is that organisms construct themselves, they make themselves. A tree grows by itself, it doesn't have to be assembled in a factory. And they have their own goals or purposes. Animals have their own purposes. Machines don't. Machines will do whatever we want them to do. They serve our purposes. A car is designed by a designer, put together in a factory, and then it serves your purposes. As long as it's in working order, it will go wherever you want it to. Organisms are different. They have their own goals and purposes. If you get on a horse, instead of sitting in a car, the horse may have its own ideas about where it wants to go. This happened to me once as an inexpert horse rider when someone persuaded me to go for a horse ride in Ireland, and I set off. I thought everything was working just fine, but then I found instead of heading for the hills, we were going down a lane that ended in a stable, and the horse had just decided it wanted to go home. So before the scientific revolution, everyone in Europe, in the medieval universities, the teachings in the universities of Oxford and Cambridge and all through Europe, was that nature is alive, the earth is alive, the planets and stars are alive, living organisms have souls, animals and plants all have souls, and we lived in a living world. The very word animal comes from the Latin word anima, for soul. The 17th century revolution, which founded modern science, got rid of all these souls and turned nature into inanimate mechanisms. And that was the big transition, the foundation of modern science. Nature is mechanical or machine-like. The second assumption is that matter is unconscious. The whole universe is made up of unconscious matter. And there's no life, spontaneity, freedom in it. You and I are made up of unconscious matter. This, of course, raises the problem of why are we conscious? And that's completely unsolved by conventional science. In fact, it's such an intractable problem, it's called the hard problem in the philosophy of mind. We ought not to be conscious, but we are. So that's the most glaring flaw in this entire worldview. So matter is unconscious. The third dogma is the total amount of matter and energy is always the same, except at the moment of the Big Bang, when it all suddenly appeared from nowhere. And that's the basic assumption. It's always the same, always will be, and you can't have anything that contravenes the law of matter, of conservation of matter and energy. The fourth assumption is that the laws of nature are fixed. They're the same today as they were at the moment of the Big Bang, and they'll be the same forever. Assumption 5, there is no purposes in nature. There are no souls, there are no purposes. Animals and plants are just mechanisms programmed to do what they do in responding to stimuli, but they have no real purposes. And the whole of evolution has no purpose or direction. It's just a matter of blind chance, the interplay of chance and necessity. Now, do scientists believe that because they've proved it through careful experiments with observations accurate to many places of decimals? No. The reason they think that is because nature's a machine, animals and plants are machines, machines don't have purposes of their own, therefore there's no purpose in evolution or in anything in nature. It's as simple as that. It just involves extrapolating the machine metaphor onto the whole of nature, and they're saying machines don't have purposes, therefore there's none in nature. No proof, no evidence, nothing. It's just an assumption. And yet it leads to this deeply depressing view that we're here just by blind chance, evolution's going absolutely nowhere, there's no point whatever in the entire universe or in our lives, except ones we choose to imagine in our illusory consciousness. It's a deeply depressing worldview, and yet this is treated as the absolute truth by a lot of people. Dogma 6 is that biological inheritance is material. Everything you inherit is inherited materially as genes in the DNA, or as epigenetic modifications of the genes, which are chemical changes in the genes or in the proteins associated with them, or as cytoplasmic inheritance. So everything is essentially material. That's what materialism says. Everything's material. So all inheritance is material. Dogma 7, your memories are stored as material memory traces inside your brain. They must be material because everything's material, so the memories must be material, and they must be inside the brain. Where else could they be? And this is a very, very widespread assumption, not just within science, but outside science too. Most people take that one for granted. They question some of the others, but that one gets away virtually scot-free in almost all circles, except perhaps among Matrix Reimprinters. Then Dogma 8, the mind is inside the head. Your mental activity is nothing but brain activity. It's all inside your brain, inside your head. Your mental life is entirely in your head. It can't be anywhere else. Everything you see and perceive is inside your head. If you feel a pain in your toe, that pain's inside your head, not where it seems to be, because your entire mental life's inside your head. Dogma 9 follows from Dogma 8.